Okay, in the summer of 1779, a set of 3 design drawings were submitted to the Royal Academy in London. Many people here will know this. Exhibit number 308 consisted of a section, an elevation and a plan drawing which included 2 distinctive title blocks rendered in a Roman tabula ansata, which is a stylized writing tablet motif. The letterforms used within these blocks are relatively geometric, near monoline, and had squared-off serifs with, squared-off terminals with no serifs. This was a radical departure from the serif typography of the 18th century. The design plan was for a British Senate house by a young architect called Jon Soane, who was on a funded scholarship grantor of Italy from 1778 to 1780. He's seen here aged 23, so approximately the same sort of time that he was there. But he didn't execute the drawing himself. It was generated by an employed draftsman, as was the custom. And the drawing is recorded as Italian hand unidentified. This drawing has been identified by James Mosley. Many of you know James Mosley and will probably talk by him. As the earliest example of a deliberately sans serif in Britain and possibly the world. And if anyone here knows of any earlier examples in Europe, particularly from Italy, please come and talk to me in the break. Soane's inspiration for his sans serif letterforms has become something of a holy grail for typographers, type designers and design historians, as it is possibly the origin and legacy of all the sans serifs of today, which represent our modern commercial and technical world. And it's possibly a big deal because if I can prove what I'm about to show you, it's the origin of modernism itself, possibly. As we all know, the earliest known metal type specimen of sans serif is recorded as 1816 in a specimen book by William Castle IV. But some page sections have recently been dated by John A. Lane as potentially printed as early as 1812. So it's 1812 or thereabouts. In the 1816 specimen, the sans serif is named 2 lines English-Egyptian, seen in caps only, and it was used as titling, as I'm sure you all know. This leaves a 1/4 century gap between Soane's serifless titling on his drawing for the RA and our first sans serif metal type. This last 1/4 of the 18th century is thinly but increasingly populated with examples of serifless letterform titling on drawings and engravings, principally by the architect Jon Soane and his close circle, the sculptors Thomas Banks and John Flaxman. Some of Soane's drawings even propose inscriptions on sans serif letters on his buildings, but I've only been able to find one so far still in existence. From 1784 onwards, Jon Soane slowly promotes his serifless letterforms on his drawings, and above is an elevation drawing for 2 gatehouses at Langley Park, which is in Norfolk in England. The South Lodge's elevation, which is above, is dated 1790 and has a pair of stone greyhounds depicted with the inscription of the Beauchamp family motto, Toujours fidèle, always faithful, rendered on the plinths beneath the dogs. Yes, it's kind of just really block handwriting. The commissioned designs for Langley Park began as early as 1784 and were eventually completed, well, billed, in 1793. So this design for armorial greyhound statues remains an early example of an intentional use of sans serif letterform, which still exists today. Very much generated in the Soane style of serifless letterforms with a wide T upon a square, a near full circle O, equilateral V, etc., with bullets between the words. These inscriptional letterforms, combined with the best examples of Soane's titling on his drawings, has informed a research. It's not really a font, it's really a sort of bit of fun, called Fount Sans, originally only in caps, but now exists in lowercase. Soane's work seems to be the primary instigation and influence of the first sans serif types of the 19th century. So if we knew Soane's reference for them, an evolutionary puzzle would be solved. Cutting to the chase then. After many months of research, I eventually came across an engraving by a well-known Italian architect and engraver, which has been in front of us all the time. Volume 1, Plate 41, Pianta del Ninfeo di Nerone, from Giovanni Battista Pironese's L'Antichita Romana of 1756. The two similarities of Nero's Nymphium with Soane's proposed Senate house strikes you immediately. Both are plans of grandiose Roman architecture. Both have two dominant title blocks. Both title blocks are rendered in stone antiquities, and both use inscriptions of serifless letterforms. These serifless letterforms are deliberately constructional, geometrically realised, and near monoline. Pironese records here an archaeological fragment with a partial Roman inscription of Onion Niana, expanded in figure 3 to suggest that the complete inscription would have read Neronian, can't even say it so badly phrased, Neronian Niana, meaning that of and in the reign of Emperor Nero. The text at the foot of the plate, 41, references positions 10 on the plan. A translation of Pironese's Italian text at the foot of the plan reveals that the fragments were located at position number 10. In this text, Pironese appears to be referring to a debate for which he believes he has the correct hypothesis, that the inscription is prefixed with the name Emperor Nero, despite the extra syllable. That the emperor completed the aqueduct servicing the Calia region of Rome, servicing his nymphium, or pleasure pools or baths, that was built in his reign following the Great Fire of AD 64, which, going by a number of accounts, Nero deliberately started himself. Pironese's engraved lettering is radically changed for the mid-18th century. It appears to be similar visually to the former Urbis fragments drawn by Pironese on a number of preceding plates in L'Antichita Romana, more significantly within the title page frontispiece, and en masse within Roma, the map engraving at the front of the publication. Pironese's fascination with former Urbis Romea, the fragmentary map of Rome created between 203 and 211 AD, began whilst working as an understudy to the engraver Giambattista Nolli. Nolli had direct access to the former Urbis fragments at the Capitoline Museum and produced, with Pironese's support and artistry, the celebrated Nolli map, Nuova Pianta di Roma, in 1748. Plate 14, seen above, has the position of the sans serif Onion Niana fragment indicated with a red arrow. The Antichita Romana is considered Pironese's most scholarly and comprehensive work on Roman antiquities, and by cross-referencing the Nolli map and Pironese's Roma map with the late 19th century archaeological survey map, former Urbis Romea by Rodolfo Lanciani, and by using a satellite image app, I was able to pinpoint the location of Onion Niana today. Our site of the Sans is seen south of the Colosseum and the Temple of Claudius, which represents the footprint of Pironese's Ninfeo di Nero. The position of Pironese's annotation number 10 is northwest of the San Stefano Rotondo and just a few meters southeast of an arch gateway or porta into Rome called the Arco di Dolabella e Silano, marked with a red arrow on the digitized Carta Archaeologica map, which is generated from Luciani's survey. Could the Onion Niana Sans inscription still be there? The location structures form part of the aqueductium, Nero's aqueduct that joins the Claudian, servicing water to the Domus area of Rome. If the Onioniana fragment was still in situ, surely there would be a record. An image online, but there's nothing. The fragment, therefore, must be viewed today as relatively insignificant, or likely small scale than a monumental inscription in marble or stone. I thought the Onioniana fragment could possibly be a Roman brick or a tile stamp, perhaps collected by Pironesi from the site indicated at number 10 on his plan of the Nymphium of Nero. Or perhaps they were still part of the brick archivolt structure. Both Giovanni and his son Francesco Pironesi represented brick stamps on a growing number of engravings released from the mid-1750s onwards, depicting both the flared and vestigial serif letterforms from antiquity. These near serifless forms of letter were likely cut on stamps, largely to prevent the clogging of brick clay. Perhaps they were indeed representations of found bricks or tiles. The legions predominantly used lineal letterforms for their brick and tile stamps. Some are in the form of tabular ansata, as used on Soane's drawing. These forms represented and promoted the authority of Rome throughout their empire. However, countless searches and studies of Roman brick stamps proved unsuccessful, but these did throw up a couple of examples with partial letter sequences that matched Onioniana, but neither have the style of letterforms rendered by Pironesi. Being part of an aqueduct, perhaps Onioniana was more likely to be an engraving of a cast Roman lead pipe, such as this example with its near monoline letterforms. Pironesi certainly represented clay and lead pipes with stamped and cast lettering, such as on his initial letter V above. But eventually its context proved much easier to locate. L'Antichita Romana has an earlier plate, number 25, figure 1, of the Arco di Dolabella Isolano in perspective, where Pironesi carefully renders the Onioniana inscription on the wall of the archivolt of the aqueduct, and it is large. Can you spot it? On Pironesi's perspective of the arch of Dolabella, the inscription is annotated B, the remains of Nero's inscription within his arches. A close-up of the archivolt and the Onioniana inscription reveals the situation of the inscription, a stone cornice brickwork tablet area with later medieval window punched through on the left, leaving a partial O. The remainder of the letters appear complete below a broken oggi architrave pediment, and the serifless component letterforms appear to be standing proud, in relief, casting shadows. So it exists. No, it doesn't exist. But nothing is recorded in the SIL database. The site of the Arch of Dolabella and Silano still stands in Rome today, but the area containing Onioniana drawn by Pironesi has since collapsed and latterly been renovated. John of Martha founded the Trinitarian order in Rome in around 1202 at the Church of San Tommaso in Formus, which is integrated into these archivolts and sits predominantly behind them. He possibly occupied a cell above the arch, but little remains of that room today. If the Onioniana letter were in existence in the 18th century, surely other engravers would have recorded them. Franzetti's plate number 66, published in 1795, has sets of 4 views of Rome engraved by Frank Morelli, and it shows the inscription. But Franzetti's work, published in 1795, is principally just a copy of Pironesi's Arch of Dolabella, with a close-up right showing the copied Onioniana inscription. And others after Pironesi, such as Domenico Pronti's engraving of the arch, plate number 47, also of 1795, are again smaller scale copies of Pironesi's original. Pronti retains only suggestion of the Onioniana inscription above right, indicating that the original reference to the inscription had by the end of the century lost its significance. If the Onioniana letters existed in Pironesi's time, then they must be present immediately prior to the publication of Antichita Romana in 1756. Giuseppe Vasi employed Piranesi as an apprentice from 1740 to around 1742, generated a veduta of the Arch of Dolabella and San Tommaso in Fornis and its surrounding architecture. He provides us with an indication of the inscription above the gateway porta, which is dedicated to the consuls Silano and Dolabella, which is still there today, but not these significantly larger letters of Oni and Niana. So where is it? Although Piranesi is well known for his engraved capriccios of fantastical architectural compositions, ATypI Romana is considered Piranesi's most detailed and exacting work regarding archaeological study and reconstructions of Roman buildings. Perhaps he was referencing to an earlier record or engraving well before the demise of the Oniana inscription. Well, Giovanni Battista Folda's map of 1690 of the gardens of the Villa Mattei, situated to the west behind the Arch of Dolabella, shows the archivolt pertaining to the Oniana inscription, and it's intact. Israel Sylvester, in reverse, Arch of Dolabella engraving, Presso di San Stefano Rotondo of 1640, shows us a double archway porta and rendered glimpse of where the Oniana inscription may have been. Giovanni Battista Maccatti's engraving of 1629, front and back of the Arch of Dolabella, are again created in reverse, but sadly from the wrong angle, and you can't work out whether there was any inscription there at all. But if Oni and Niana inscription had disappeared by the 1750s, there is no conclusive evidence of an inscription existing on any engravings prior to Piranesi's plate 25. What was Piranesi referencing? Perhaps it was pure invention, along with his grand reconstruction of the plan of the Ninfeo de Nero, which today we understand as simply one of his grand architectural propositions. Eventually, I found proof of existence. Allo Giovanoli executed engraving of the Arch of Dolabella sometime before 1616. It shows the roundel mosaic of John and Martha, and it shows the inscription, what reads Monian Niana. But Giovanoli's scribe or burr engraved lettering remains identical through his work, so even though it was in serif, it doesn't mean that it wasn't sans serif. A clue perhaps can be found in ATypI Romana in the chapter title page, Explanation of the Aqueducts, which includes an engraved initial N. The worm eye viewpoint includes an aqueduct archivolt in the background beside the N and a partial O. There are clearly two letters in Piranesi's perspective, plate 25, which he obviously wanted to stress to the reader at the head of his chapter on Roman aqueducts. When flipped, the initial N and partial O becomes a representation of the first two letters of Oni and Niana. Accepting that Oni and Niana inscription letterforms existed in some form, what led Jon Soane to use serifless letters on his drawings for the British Senate House plan? Well, Soane met Piranesi when he arrived in Rome in summer 1778, shortly before Piranesi's death in November that year, upon which Piranesi gave the young architect 4 engravings from Veduta di Roma. Soane was given a letter of introduction by Sir William Chambers, the architect and treasurer of the Royal Academy, after he won his scholarship. Chambers had originally given it to another architect, but passed it on to Soane when it was returned to him after that architect unfortunately died. This letter contained a number of recommendations, who to meet concerning the practice of architecture. The name Piranesi is most carefully penned and cited as the principal contact. Soane's owned a copy of ATypI Romana, seen here, plate 41 under a magnifying glass. Soane's edition was from 1776, titled as Opera di Piranesi. He obviously got it second hand. The book and plates are confirmed as being the first printing of 1776. And they are heavily thumbed on the map plan of the Ninfeo de Nero. When you handle this book in the Soane Museum, there's quite a lot of foxing throughout, but that drawing that you see up there, the page with that engraving on it, is the most heavily thumbed of all of them. The paper is cracked, it's patinated, it's worn thin by the numbers of people that have handled and studied that plate. It was clearly considered the most important plate in the book. The only other plate that's fairly heavily handled is the one on the image below, which is another plan drawing of baths. We may never know if the inscription ever existed in the form Piranesi drew it, but it was obviously there at some point in history, as recorded by Allo Giovanoli. Piranesi may have been referencing Giovanoli's engraving, and it seems that it was republished in the middle of the 18th century, while Piranesi was generating engravings for L'Antichita Romana. Or perhaps fragments were retained by the order of the Trinitarian monks, or were being utilised as salvage building materials for renovations to the Pilgrims' Hospice, which they ran from under the arch. The annotated number 10 at the site of the Sans inscription is adjacent to the third aqueduct archivolt down from the Arco di Dolabella, which seems strange as it is rendered in Piranesi's perspective as the second archivolt. An error. Piranesi's attention to detail is legendary. He doesn't make simple mistakes. Does this mean remnants of the inscription were found or unearthed beside the third archivolt? Do the Trinitarian monks of San Tommaso have the Onioniana inscription as fragments? Perhaps the fragments are still there. The evidence is mounting up. Piranesi certainly proposed a radical letter form in an inscription that represented the authority of Roman architecture through their achievements as aqueduct engineers supplying the life force of water to their capital. This classically rendered serifless titling, plate 41, is certainly amongst the first, if not the first deliberate sans serif, that leads the way forwards to the first sans metal types of the 19th century, and ultimately the dominance of the commercial sans throughout the 20th. But who was the Italian draftsman that drew Soane's title blocks? Well, that's for another conference. So if anyone wants to invite me, again, I can hopefully prove who actually did the drawing. Fount Sans 1756 is only a working title and very much still in development, but I noticed the deliberate serifed E on Piranesi's engraving. Why? Piranesi was more than adept at rendering this character to stand out without needing the serifs added to the, to maintain the letter with a horizontal tonal shading. No, this letter is referencing the Greco-Roman architectural debate at the time. The authority of Roman architecture was being challenged as taking all it knew from the Greeks, and this didn't sit comfortably with Piranesi. But it does provide opportunities for extensive sets of tablet initials with and without component serifs. Piranesi's Etruscan fragment plate, shown in his publication titled Observations of 1765, Piranesi's forceful argument for the superiority of Rome and therefore its architecture, he directs our attention to the ornament and serifless letters of Etruscan inscription as the precursor to that of Rome. Piranesi recognises a natural progression from the early Roman lineal inscriptional forms towards the refinement of serifs. Notice the carefully engraved outline A by Francesco Piranesi. By highlighting the E, is Piranesi suggesting that the Romans added serifs to the lineal Etruscan characters, thus dispensing the argument for the direct influence of the Greeks and their alphabet? When you're reviving type, you are struck by such idiosyncratic features. Notice also the wider stroke crossbar of the two A's, most deliberate and prominent. These A's are reminiscent of the Mason's plumb square, which Piranesi includes on his title page of Observations of 1765. Piranesi places it second in the hierarchy of important professions, with it representing engineering. The Mason square shows us when a structure is true, perfectly vertical, and here with an enhanced vertical line, likely acts as a metaphor for Piranesi and the truth of his ideology. According to Piranesi, Onioniana is therefore the true form of letter, evolved from the Etruscans, not the Greeks, the primal, the primitive Roman. The Neroniana initials will allow me to progress Sans towards a more scholarly font that is wholly representative of the earliest 18th century serif typeface. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jon Melton.